If we want to preserve and protect the quality of life that has sustained and nurtured all living things for millions and millions of years, all nations and people must join together to address with greater interest, greater concern, greater commitment, greater resources, and certainly with a greater sense of urgency, the problems and challenges that we're creating for ourselves and for future generations.
This topic of deforestation is an enormous problem, I think in the United States and worldwide.
Deforestation is usually used when people convert forest to some other land use. So for instance, if you're cutting down forest and turning it into farmland, or cutting down forest and turning it into suburbia or something like that. So if you go in and you've got a tract of forest and then you run a road through it and put some houses in one part and maybe run another road through it and put some other houses in another part, you start to break up the remaining forest into fragments, and that breaks up plant and animal populations and separates them. So there are well-documented effects on certain species.
At the same time as a lot of the wealth from our country has come from the timber and so forth, we've really extracted a lot of it. We've sort of started in the east and moved across the country, coming over to the west. Agencies like the Forest Service are, have done a lot, but they're often caught between many conflicting needs. And so it's, on the one hand, we have a need for timber for jobs, we have a need for, for ecological habitat, for animals. We want things to be there long term, but as it stands now, we have so much less forest than we've had in the past. We have more and more people. We have expectations about having wood products available, and so one thing that we've done is we're getting a lot of our wood from outside the United States.
If we're going to set aside forest land, and if we're not going to cut back, you can probably see where I'm going with this. But if we're going to set aside forest land, if we're still going to use as much wood as we ever have, if we're going to build as many homes, as many decks, if we're going to continue using wood, and if we're going to set aside our own forest because we don't want to cut it or because we don't want to look at a clear cut, then I think we have to be careful, because somebody's got to give us that wood. And if we're not making the wood ourselves, then we could be really affecting birds and all kinds of wildlife species thousands of miles away from here.
70% of Earth's land animals and plants live in forests, and many cannot survive the deforestation that destroys their homes.
There's sort of two causes of deforestation in the tropics. There's probably more than two, but two big ones, and one of them is the desire for tropical hardwoods. So a lot of those woods that grow, a lot of those trees that grow in tropical forests have really desirable characteristics as wood. So multinational corporations want to come in, cut those trees, and sell the wood. Then there's also, those countries have high rates of poverty, and so people are eager to look for an opportunity to improve their standard of living. And one thing they can do is they can go off into the forest, cut some forest down, and essentially homestead. They can carve out their own little agricultural chunk, and those two things combined are leading to fairly rapid rates of deforestation of rainforests in South America and in Asia.
The world's rainforest could completely vanish within 100 years at the current rate of deforestation.
So what's happening is we are exporting our clear cuts. So you and I don't have to look at clear cuts anymore. Those clear cuts are getting exported to Peru, Chile, New Zealand, places in South America, some of which would be considered third world countries.
What can the United States do about deforestation in other countries?
Well, I certainly think that we're unlikely to win any friends internationally if we start going into other countries and telling them they can't cut down the forest. I mean, I think in some of these countries they already feel like that's what we're doing, like that we're trying to tell them how to manage their resources. And I know there are a lot of people in a lot of countries who feel like, well, countries like the United States exploited their resources, they became developed first world countries, and the U.S. shouldn't then in turn tell these other countries that they can't exploit their resources.
But unfortunately, some of the third world countries, and this is probably not a surprise, but some of the third world countries don't necessarily have really strong environmental laws. And I mentioned to you, we have the National Forest Management Act, we have the National Environmental Policy Act, we have the Clean Air Act, we have the Clean Water Act, we have dozens, literally, no exaggeration, dozens of environmental laws that very strictly and tightly control what we do or don't do with our natural resources. Some of the third world countries don't have that. What would be one thing is to try and work with some of the other countries, I think, so that we're on more of a level playing field, so that we're not up here and they're not down here in terms of laws and requirements and what they can do and can't do, that kind of thing.
What about deforestation and global climate change?
If we can grow more trees and suck more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, that's a good thing, it's not a bad thing. But it's not gonna, if we keep pulling carbon in the form of fossil fuels out of the ground, burning it and shooting that carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, doesn't matter how many trees we plant, we're still going to have global climate change.
Deforestation. The problem will live on if we continue to export clear cuts. We consume more than the world can provide, and we must find a way to consume our resources more sustainably.
Is, to be honest about it, it's going to take a long time to fix the problem. We can't do it instantly.
But I think thinking about sustainability and setting up things so that there will be both jobs in the long run and ecosystems in the long run is difficult. But it's very difficult because we have increasing pressure. There's more and more of us, we're consuming more and more, and there's less forest left.